So on Innovate 2016, we've been mostly focused on the domestic thinking about the 2016 presidential election, particularly from Silicon Valley. But there's another way of looking at it, thinking about the election from the outside. How is the rest of the world, particularly startup entrepreneurs outside America, how are they thinking about the election? And to talk about that, old friend of mine, Chris Schroeder, Washington, D.C. based venture capitalist, serial entrepreneur, very successful CEO, also the author of Startup Rising, a very important book about innovation in the Middle East. Chris, welcome to Innovate 2016.
Always great to be with you, buddy.
Chris, you're a globe-trotter.
I am.
So
aren't we all?
Well, speak for yourself. What is the world making? And you spend a lot of time in the Middle East, and particularly with startup entrepreneurs. How are people thinking about what's going on in America in 2016 around the presidential election? I also forgot to add, just to make you an even more awesome guy, that not only are you a VC and an entrepreneur, but you also were the personal aide to James Baker in the Bush father administration. So you have a lot of political background too. So you cover this from a number of different angles.
Yeah. So I think there are a couple of ways to look at this. I mean, first of all, those that I visit, and I spend a lot of time in the Middle East and Turkey, and now I've been in Southeast Asia, Africa, and South America. Those of a certain generation, when you mention people like Secretary Baker, want to know what's become of him, why they don't seem to exist anymore, and that there was a certain conversation and engagement that was done in those days that just seems to have evaporated in this election cycle well beyond Donald Trump. The young entrepreneurs who don't have a memory of that, first of all, they all care about is, are they building great companies or are they not building great companies? And they are seeing rises of opportunities economically in their neighborhoods and in broader regions, and emerging market to emerging market, that has them actually much more focused on that than if we had this conversation even maybe 10 years ago, where there would have been a lot more curiosity about how America might affect them. But it doesn't take 15 seconds to scratch the surface and have people want to figure it out. And I would tell you that it is a collective disappointment. I think there are a lot of people who have a mixed view about America, from things which are positive about us and things that in our history are more controversial, particularly from their lens. But I don't think any of them would have expected that the kind of negativity, the kind of sort of reality TV, the sort of pettiness that has been manifest in this campaign, but particularly with Donald Trump, was possible in America. And I think particularly when you add things about the way he addresses situations like immigration in general, about Mexicans and Latinos more specifically, everything he said about the Muslims, as you can imagine, has registered with actually concern also from people that I see in the world. So it just doesn't reflect on us in any positive light.
Is it just Trump, or is there something broader, the disappointment?
So I think that Trump has been able to have a particular manifestation of it. I think that the campaign, generally speaking, even before him, and we even saw it now most recently with the terrible attack in Florida, is that there's sort of if not a hair trigger, a very quick reaction to jump to generalizations of people. And to the degree that this campaign has been making it very acceptable to talk about them in some big abstract way, almost in a McCarthy-like way, in my personal view, I think that has been viewed as quite not only frustrating but worrisome to people overall. Just to be specific on it, I mean, there are even Muslim American entrepreneurs who are Americans, right, by definition, who wonder if this debate is actually the harbinger of something that could be more profound to come. I don't believe that is the case, but that certainly is a concern you hear even here.
Well, that's completely understandable. Chris, is there disappointment amongst entrepreneurs that the candidates aren't debating innovation, that they're not getting a way in which America is the model for innovation?
So in a way, people again disaggregate politics, which they care less and less about and more about what's going on a day-to-day basis. So I'll give you an example. About a year ago, I was at one of the great shared workspaces in Cairo, a baseball's throw away from Tahrir Square. And they were gathering maybe of 1,000 young people, mostly from Egypt there. And I came into the room, and sort of in the back of the courtyard area, I could see these big signs of men. And I thought, wow, well, I guess maybe the government's co-opted. It must be posters of Sisi or something like that. As I get closer, all the posters these kids had put up were Mark Zuckerberg, Jack Dorsey, Elon Musk. And so there's a very clear disaggregation that there's something very powerful and important and global that they relate to and empathize with and aspire to co-author with. And there's this other thing called politics. And the new generation, I don't care what country they're in, they're looking at politics in a very sort of distant lens of that is not solving problems, we're solving problems, we want to figure out a way to do it. Now, there's no question that government and politics matters to creating big ecosystems. So where people have begun to step up, like in the regions I've been following, Sheikh Mohammed and in Dubai and UAE generally speaking, clearly there's been emphasis on building an ecosystem of innovation. That young people will appreciate. But again, most of them are just figuring out how can I connect with other people like me who want to solve big problems, and we're just going to do that in the meantime.
Chris, you're also very well connected in Silicon Valley. What can tech entrepreneurs, innovators, what can Silicon Valley do to make this less embarrassing, to try to fix American politics?
Well, I don't know. Again, the Silicon Valley is not that different from the other phenomena that I've said. There are some amazing people here who are coming up with ideas through technology and platforms that create greater transparency and exchange of engagement. Nation Builder is one that's been tools to make government more efficient. CrowdPack, which is a company that I am mildly involved in, is really trying to aggregate better data and information for voters to make better decisions about what they're doing and become more quickly and efficiently informed. So there are lots of people who are putting a lot of time to civil society and civic engagement.
And we've had some of those people actually on the show.
I bet you have. But the thing is, it's still, I think more often than not, the innovators here will say, this is important, I want to be responsible to it, but I can actually make society better by building what I'm building right now.
How can you stand being in Washington, D.C.? Why don't you just move here?
You know, it's funny, I have had a lot of connections to the East Coast generally. My wife is from Boston, I'm from New York overall. This has been a nice compromise city for us. With all the work in the markets that I go to, it's been a wonderful ability to be able to get to them more easily.
Any good stuff going on in D.C.?
You know, there was a time where I thought D.C. was going to be toe-to-toe with New York, and that really dropped off after September 11th. My view is that a lot of money and technology skill went to Homeland Security and those kinds of things. But there's like 1776 is an amazing accelerator and data collector of companies that are trying to solve big problems in areas that government affects, like education and healthcare and finance and that type of stuff. And there's some really exciting companies that are starting to rise in and around in ed tech and others in the Washington area. So that to me is very encouraging, but it's not yet what some other cities are, not only in places like New York and San Francisco, obviously Boston, Austin, but even other places in the world that are starting to grow and become, I think, very exciting. And I hope that Washington will be better in the next 5 years. But look, I can get to Silicon Valley all the time. I'm out here almost a third of the time overall. And I have to tell you, I kind of like being away from the echo chamber of New York, the echo chamber of Silicon Valley. It's kind of nice to be able to step back from time to time and reflect on issues and not get too sucked in and come at them with a different perspective. So there are trade-offs, but it's worked out pretty well.
Chris, your book, Startup Rising, painted a very positive, a very optimistic picture of the Middle East. I think it was quite unusual in that sense, certainly a counterintuitive book. What do you think we can still learn from the Middle East, from the innovators in the Middle East, in the US, particularly perhaps in terms of the lack of debate in America? What can the Middle East teach us? We're always thinking about what we can teach them.
But you just said it perfectly. I mean, I think there's a general sense, and it's most of the questions I get in the West, it's about the Middle East, it's about Africa, it's other growth markets overall, which is like, what's the Silicon Valley of X? What can we bring to show them? The worst example of all is there are politicians, more so than Silicon Valley types, who refer to the greatest American export as entrepreneurship. And if you go among these societies, whether in the Middle East or Latin America, I mean, entrepreneurship has been 10,000 years all across these societies. We don't have anything just to hand to them. But at the same time, look, clearly some amazing things have happened in the ecosystems across the United States and other parts of Europe and elsewhere, but particularly Silicon Valley. Lots can be shared in that experience. But what is happening in these other societies is, one, with the rising almost universal access of technology, all of a sudden everyone has got great ideas and are building things for their markets, and nobody understands their markets and their sensitivities like they do. That's one potential co-authorship. But the more interesting one is you now have mobile-first societies. People have never had legacy systems or landlines, and they are innovating and solving really interesting problems, which I think Silicon Valley and other people have to learn and understand as well. Not just in terms of those markets, but because I think innovation will come from these markets that actually have global impact. And that just is, it's a different mindset. This isn't about anymore like we would have had a conversation 10 years ago. Going to another market meant to outsource because you could do it cheaply. It meant to go to another market because it's a big market like China, you just need to be there. Like, those days are not with us anymore. It really is more about co-authorship and mutual respect and development of broader opportunities as these economies grow.